Hello, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, what's your next vacation? Fancy a ghetto or slum tour? I am not kidding. We look at the growing industry of poverty tourism and if it's educational or just plain old-fashioned exploitation. Filling in for Malika Bilal this week is our very own Omar Badar. Omar usually does his magic behind the scenes, and today and the rest of this week he's going to be wrangling the community's conversations and comments. What are they saying about tourism and slum tourism?
It's quite an interesting reaction. There are many people who are actually trying to find the good side of this kind of tourism, saying that maybe it has educational value, or that maybe the affected areas, the poor areas that are experiencing this kind of tourism also benefit from that tourism. But by and large, there's plenty of backlash against this sort of thing. If you take a look at my screen, Mimi says, the very idea of this kind of tourism is enough to make me suck my teeth, roll my eyes, and breathe real deep. Tourism is opportunism with a guilt trip. And that kind of outrage is pretty wide online. Of course, for those of you watching at home, we would like to hear from you, so be sure to tweet us using the hashtag AJStream.
I'm imagining Mimi sucking her teeth right now. Bear with us, Mimi. So sitting at the table with us here in the studio, we have Lola Adeshoye, and Lola is a social and political writer who's previously written about slum tourism in an article called Favela Chic. Lola, it's great to have you in the stream.
Thank you, good to be here.
We'll hear more from Lola in just a little while. Now, as many of you know, the stream is a social media community with its own TV show. So you know what that means? It means that your ideas can inspire our programs. So if there's a topic that you think we should be doing on the stream, get in touch with us directly. And it's really easy to do that. Go to our About page at stream.aljazeera.com/about. And there you will find our Twitter handles. You can literally tweet us. Tweet me at Femi OK, tweet at Malika Bilal. And then Omar is way down here. Tweet Omar with an idea. If we like it, you too could be in the stream.
I'm Hamza Shaban, I'm a freelance writer, and I'm in the stream.
So when planning a vacation, there are so many options. Swimming and tanning at the beach, camping or hiking in the mountains, or maybe even visiting a bustling city centre. But would you consider a visit to the slums of India or Kenya, or taking in a favela in Brazil? In recent years, a growing number of travel agencies around the world are offering poverty tours. And as more tourists from wealthy countries visit slums, the practice has sparked a great deal of controversy. So critics accuse the industry of turning a major social issue into entertainment, while advocates argue that these tours are the best way to understand poverty and raise awareness. So today we ask, is this form of tourism exploration or exploitation? To help us answer this question, we're joined by Fabian Frenzel. He's a researcher on slum tourism and a lecturer at the University of Leicester. In our Google Plus Hangout are Lee Tusman, Creative Director of Hidden City Philadelphia. That's an organisation aiming to connect people with Philadelphia's lesser-known places, and Stephanie Hayes, the CEO of Reality Tours and Travel, a travel agency that aims to break down the negative attitudes about slums. It's great to have all of you in the stream. Lee, I have to start with you. You went on a slum tour of a slum called Dharavi, which is quite near Mumbai. Can you set the scene? What did you see and what did you do?
Sure. Well, I got in touch because I was visiting Mumbai for about a week, and I was really interested in going beyond the typical tourist spots to really see people in the country and what life is actually like. And I was particularly curious to kind of get a feel for what life is like inside a slum. I had heard about the tour, Be the Local Tours, from a resident that I was staying with in Mumbai. And I got in touch through their website, and I visited, and for about 3 hours I walked through Dharavi with a student based out of who actually grew up inside Dharavi. He took me on a walking tour through the slum, and it was just me and him meeting people, visiting shops, and being able to talk to local residents.
So what was the image that's always going to stay with you? What did you see and you just thought, I am never going to forget that?
I mean, I think initially it was the shock of seeing how closely packed together people live, both in terms of residences on top of residences and businesses, both informal living arrangements and informal businesses. but also seeing that there's really actually a thriving and beautiful life as well, and really getting a little bit more of a context of how people actually live together.
So this sounds to me like that was a very positive experience for you, Lee, right?
It was, yeah. I came away with a very positive experience, and I felt like I had a much better understanding of the area and of the people.
So that's one perspective from Lee and that Dharavi tour there close to Mumbai. I'm going to share another story with you. The Real Bronx Tours. Have a look at this About page. They're no longer in existence as this tour, but on the About page it says, a ride through a real New York City ghetto. When people in the Bronx in New York found this out, they were furious. Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. was one of many people who tried to get that tour shut down, and they did it. And they actually said, thanks to you, our Bronx spirit prevailed. This Bronx tour will no longer continue. So we spoke to Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. just earlier today to find out why he was so furious about this tour. Have a listen to what he told us earlier.
Not only were they given misinformation, not only were they given outdated history, or their information was not current, but they also did really disgusting things, such as stop by a food pantry and had these tourists sort of gawk and take photos of people who are less fortunate than they are.
Ruben is really upset, Lola.
Yes.
Do you get why he was so upset?
I totally get why he's so upset. I think listening to what Lee was saying just before, it's very interesting. You know, Lee found it educational and interesting. What about the people who actually live there? You know, what about the people that have to put up with strangers coming to their environment and treating them as if they're in a zoo? Because I have been in an environment where that has happened, and I've seen it several times, where people will come on a bus or they'll come on foot and they take photos. And what I find most interesting, for example, when I was in Soweto, was I'm a Westerner, essentially, but I was sitting there, and because I was black and because I was in a shebeen and because I was with other Sowetans, the tourists were taking pictures of me. And if they'd actually talked to me and engaged and asked me, well, who are you and what do you people do here and how do you live and how is it, that would have been fine. But there is already an assumption that if people are in a particular environment, that they are poor, that they are a certain way, without actually asking any questions. So I found that to be quite an interesting thing. You don't actually know who these people are. You don't know what they do. You don't know how they live. And that, for me, is more important. It should be about the human element. Have a conversation, talk to someone. And if you really want to be engaged with someone, you can do so without doing it in that way.
I have to say that Soweto is a township, a very famous township in
Yes,
Johannesburg,
a very large
South
one
Africa.
too. Yeah, in
and people
Johannesburg.
come there because Nelson Mandela's house was there.
Yes.
So there's a reason to come there.
Yes, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Omar.
You know, we have a tweet also from somebody who also has had a personal experience with this. Nanjala says, went with a friend of mine and was so embarrassed by it. Took a teaching job at a local school in part to clear my conscience. She goes on to say, it ended up being a life-changing experience, but started out awful. Those things are exploitative and selfish. And I think I want to throw this to Lee. Do you think Nanjala had a particularly bad individual experience, or do you think she just had the wrong mindset going into this sort of thing?
No, I completely agree with her. I don't, you know, her experience sounds like something I wouldn't want at all. I think the one that I went on, it was just me. I didn't bring a camera. And it wasn't, you know, if you came on a bus with a group of people and were gawking like you're in a safari, I agree, that sounds totally exploitational and would not be an experience that I would want to replicate or go on myself either.
So Steph, there's this question about slum tours being unethical. You run one. What's your pushback to the general idea that you shouldn't be going and staring at poor people?
I mean, the thing about us is I can't speak for slum tourism in all over the world, because part of what we're showing is how complex a slum like Derby is and how it differs place to place. What I can say about our tours is we do them very responsibly. First of all, we have a strict no photography policy, so that would never happen. We travel in small groups. We have a dress code, and we often turn away visitors if we think they might be offensive. We encourage interaction. We've worked closely with the community. We have visitors fill in a feedback form after the tour that I read at least once a week, and we're constantly kind of working in cooperation with the community.
Why do you think people sign up for one of your tours?
I think for us, India is a unique place, and Mumbai is an incredible city where over 50% of the population lives in informal housing. So to come to a city like Mumbai and not at least try to understand that side of the city would be missing a huge part of what makes the city tick. So we try to show that with an educational and historical component. I completely agree with Lola that it's great to go and wander around by yourself, and after the tours we encourage visitors to eat lunch there, to talk, but there's such a history and information and current issues around Derby that we think we're adding value to the experience by giving them that basic knowledge. And in doing so, we give back to the community through our NGO that runs programs.
Lola, you're frowning.
I have such an issue with this whole thing. If people are interested in poverty and really helping poor people, there are poor people all over America. 1 in 7 people in this country is poor. You don't have to go across the other side of the world to go and see poor people or interact with poor people. The other issue I have is the power dynamics that it reinforces, the socio-economic power dynamics that I'm rich, I'm going to come and look at you, poor person. I'm generally white, I'm going to come and look at you, dark-skinned person. I just have such an issue with the whole thing, and I think dressing it up with, you know, you're kind of teaching people the other side of a slum, or, I mean, what is there to teach people about living in a terrible way? Like, I just literally don't get it.
Do you know, this is a really good, Steph, hold on one second, I'm coming back to you, but this is, what is there to teach people? We have a lecturer who actually studies and researches this whole area. Fabian, I know you're dying to jump in, so jump in, and Steph, we'll come back to you.
I find it very important to keep in mind that when we talk about slums, that's a very gross generalization, and these spaces are usually very diverse. They're not just, they're mostly associated with poverty, and I guess that's also what tourists are interested in. When you ask tourists, why do you go, what do you expect to see? They usually say, I'm expecting to see poverty. Now, when we have this understanding of what a slum is, or so first, it's a very simplified view, and these tours do sometimes change perceptions, show that it's more complex, that people, for some people living in slums is actually a step up. They came from rural poverty and they migrated into the city, and the city becomes a place of opportunity. I'm not saying slums are great places, but I'm just trying to explain that the perspectives on what a slum is can change potentially in these tours and then move beyond.
Right.
That's certainly what we've experienced when we talked to some of the tourists who went on them.
Steph.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to the point, I mean, I think poverty tourism is a bit of a misnomer for us, because what we're actually trying to show is many of our visitors think they're going to come see idle, passive, sometimes criminal people. And the fact of the matter is that Derby has a $600 million industry. We're trying to, like Fabian said, show the complexities, and if that means they go home and they think about their own poor differently, then we've done our job. So it's raising awareness, using Derby as an example, but I think it's applicable to many other situations in some of our visitors' homes.
You know, there's an interesting perspective here online. There is, if you can take a look at my screen, Karen comments on Facebook, says, unless it is a volunteer vacation where they are actually going to work, build, plant, repair, or in some way improve the conditions of the ghettos, then it is exploiting the extremely poor for entertainment and shock value. And we have another comment on the website, tourismconcern.org, that says, the benefits tourism could bring for us are investments in social projects inside the favela. If there are institutions like an NGO that distributed a percentage of revenues from this tourism to social projects, then it would benefit, in their opinion. And I want to throw this actually back to Fabian. Do you think this type of partnership is actually possible? Is it viable to partner with organizations to make this type of tourism actually more beneficial than it currently is to those communities?
It does happen a lot. One of the things is that sometimes this is also even actively encouraged by local government. In Rio de Janeiro, there's certainly that phenomenon. In South Africa, there's a large drive by governments, their local governments, to see whether through this interest that tourists have, that could be in some way made into lasting improvements in these neighborhoods. Now, there's an important issue to keep in mind here. We just look at purely economic terms in the sense of like there's so much money coming in because people pay for the tours, and then that's a very I think it's a very minimal effect because there's only so many tourists, but unfortunately so the problems we're facing with poverty are so vast. So it's certainly too much to say there would be an overall chance for slum tourism to be working on this. But then in small projects, small NGOs can perfectly well include this and do include these strategies into making it part of their financing. You can see that in South Africa, we've studied this quite a bit, that NGOs are partnering up with two organizations and people are seeing projects that these NGOs do in these neighborhoods, and there are also money, but also like other support, lasting support can flow.
So Lola, you remain sort of steadfastly unconvinced by any of the arguments so far. If your face is anything to go by. Okay, how about the educational argument, traveling around the world, understanding other cultures?
Yeah, I mean, I get that on a sort of superficial level, and I get that you could say, well, the X amount of people live here, this is what they do, and okay, fair enough, you get to see some aspect of it. But how deep is this education? What is it really teaching people apart from that, yes, there are poor people in the world and here, look at them. I don't really, again, understand the education piece for me doesn't go far enough. If you wanted a true education, if tourists wanted a true education, then spend 2 weeks teaching at a school, spend 2 weeks do something that is actually immersive. A couple of hours walking around and looking at people and you leave and go about your holiday, okay, maybe it gives you a, 2-hour education, whatever that's worth. But I just don't, I think, because what we're talking about here is people.
Right.
And we're talking about human beings, Okay, it's like even if I went to the zoo for 2 hours, how much am I going to learn about animals in those 2 hours? We're talking about human beings who live there, who have families there, who have kids that they educate, who have a future. How much education are you getting about those people? It's not just about looking at a poor area.
So Lee, it sounds like we need to put Lola on your Hidden City Philadelphia tour,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I'd be interested in, I think we're an interesting contrast a little bit to the kinds of tours you've been talking about before, because not only do we do tours, we also are a journalism operation. We started a little over a year and a half ago. We have 13,000 weekly readers, and as opposed to being aimed at people outside of Philadelphia, which is where we're based, we're actually aimed explicitly at the city of Philadelphia. People that live in Philly. And so the people that come on our tours are people sometimes from their own neighborhoods, visiting their own neighborhood, because we take people inside of buildings, manufacturing spaces, schools, other spaces that they wouldn't normally be able to get inside. We want to kind of create a way for people to start a dialogue together, different kinds of people. Sometimes people will live in a different neighborhood, but they work in this neighborhood and they want to get a better understanding of what's going on in that community. So we really see what we do as a social capital enterprise, bringing together lots of different groups of people, starting a dialogue and forming a community that can lead to social projects happening together. And that's actually, we have a bunch of examples of success stories of that, specifically happening.
Right. Omar.
We have a video comment actually here from somebody named Kent who has an idea about how how individuals can basically make this experience a more moral experience. Take a listen.
First, do we go as respectful learners, not as people going to save somebody else or to impose our change on someone else? Second, when I return from the trip, am I more aligned with justice in the way I live? And third, after I return, does the relationship ongoing and sustained in a way that's both beneficial for the people I've visited and that's beneficial to my life, again, to align more closely with justice? So these aren't guarantees, but I think they can move us towards more respectful, positive exchange.
Lola, do you think that it might be partially part of the mindset of the person who's actually participating in this tour as opposed to the tour itself?
Yes, I definitely think it's a mindset thing. I mean, I think if there are people, like there was somebody who talked on, I think, Twitter before or Facebook about how they actually went to work at a school afterwards because they felt bad, and that was a life-changing experience. So obviously the individual who goes, if they're conscious enough, they will probably go on to explore something more. I just wonder how many of them actually are that sort of aware. One thing that I find interesting, the gentleman talking right now, is I used to do a lot of exchanges to Italy when I was younger, and I went to a sort of rural Italian small town that I wouldn't have otherwise seen, but I kept in touch with the guy that I stayed with and his family for many years, and we interacted, we engaged. So I really got to understand the person, their life, their family, how they interact, how they think. So I think those kind of things are more beneficial than just the 2-hour tour.
Fabian, you see more slums and poverty-stricken areas than probably most of us. If you were going to advise our viewers, and maybe Lola, where they should go around the world where they're going to have a very positive experience, what would be on your list?
Okay. Sorry, there was some strange noise.
What would be on your list?
I was going to say something which I think hasn't really come up yet, and it's important because it's always assumed that, well, we don't really know, or haven't really talked about how people in the slums see these tools. And there's been some really interesting research in Brazil about this, which kind of shows the complexities of this. When a colleague of mine went around with a large team of researchers asking people in the Ocinha, which is one of the favelas that is most visited in Rio de Janeiro, people were generally quite positive about the tours. And that had to do with a certain attention they were getting from these tours of like being, in a sense, recognized as living and being, you know, someone as part of the city, that they didn't get necessarily in the same way from the middle classes and elites in Rio de Janeiro themselves. So tourism brings an interesting perspective in so far as it does change or does influence these kind of relations. And that goes, you know, with this question of like, well, maybe it's not a good idea to go and visit a slum, but is it better to not look at it at all, you know, to completely ignore it?
Okay, so Fabian, he didn't give us his list of places that we could visit that would be educational and not exploitative, but that is why we have a post-show, Fabian. It's okay. We need to tell people to go to stream.aljazeera.com, and then you can hear some of his experiences of places that he's travelled around. But right now, here's Omar with some other stories that we're following.
What happens when a Photoshop maverick sets up hidden cameras at a Stockholm bus stop? Take a look. Retouch artist Eric Johansson was behind a prank which transformed unsuspecting strangers into live ads right before their eyes. The initiative was part of Creative Day, an online event launched by software company Adobe to rally creative professionals and visionaries from across the Nordic region. In just 4 days, the video has garnered more than 11 million views. Next up is Pakistan, where a battle over YouTube wages on, potentially putting its mother company Google at risk. YouTube was banned in the country last year after releasing a controversial movie trailer, but Anusha Rahman, the new IT and telecommunications minister, vowed to pump in extra money if needed and do whatever it takes to bring YouTube back to Pakistan. Netizens shared concerns about reports that Rahman threatened to ban Google if it did not cooperate with filtering out blasphemous and objectionable materials from YouTube. But Rahman dismissed the news as misreporting. Nonetheless, Pakistanis online weighed in. Riyazat says Pakistan needs Google. Rahman responded saying, "We need technology, but without compromising on our moral, religious, and ethical values." Shakir pushed back saying, "What exactly are our values, and who determines them?" For more on those leads, be sure to visit stream.aljazeera.com. And also, let us know what stories you're following. They could end up on a future show. Femi?
Talking about future shows, on the next AJ stream, sports. Or to you, Lola, sport.
Sport.
Yes, being a British Nigerian type person. I hear that you're really up and you're a jock on sports.
Somebody on the stream team has been spreading bad rumors about me.
Well, tell me everything you know about American football.
Virtually nothing apart from watching the Super Bowl. That's about the extent of it.
So, okay, so it's going to be a good show for you, a learning experience for Omar Badar, and probably for you as well. Would you give up millions of dollars and a career in professional sports for the sake of your religion? The American professional football players, the Abdullah brothers, did just that. They'll be joining us in the studio and we will find out why they chose Islam over fame and money. I can't wait for that conversation. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. You know where you'll find us online. Thanks for watching. Rather than the actual area. We're still talking. I'm trying to convince Lola, and she's not being convinced. I said, is there anything that we can tell you about slum tourism, about going into other people's areas and seeing how other people live that could convince you? No. She's like, no. Okay. So that is what we're talking about today. Is slum tourism, is it exploitation or education? So Lola Adeshoye is with us. She's a social and political writer who's previously written about slum tourism in an article called Favela Chic. On Skype, we have Fabian Frenzel. He's a researcher on slum tourism and a lecturer at the University of Leicester. In a Google Plus Hangout, Lee Tusman, creative director of Hidden City Philadelphia. That's an organization aiming to connect people with Philadelphia's lesser known places. And Stephanie Hayes, the CEO of Reality Tours and Travel, a travel agency that aims to break down the negative attitudes about slums. Steph, I know you talked about joining up with the NGO and the real good that can come out of the work that you're doing. You're pretty much an NGO, really.
Right. We're actually two separate organizations, but our tours fund our NGO, and that NGO runs projects in the community. And because we have a stable source of income, it's quite a unique model because there's lots of NGOs here, and they have to constantly ask for grants and ask for fundraising, where our model is very sustainable. So we always know the English classes are going to run, the football program will be there. And then once we became successful, we realized we don't have to do it all ourselves. There are existing NGOs working in Dharavi that we can support through resources, through funding, and things like that. And that's a critical part of our organization.
Omar.
We have another video comment here from Jacqueline who has thoughts on this particular issue.
Patronizing. I don't think slum tours really help those it's intended to help. The money that's raised, instead of going directly to the people that it's supposed to help, goes to staff overheads, admin costs, and other costs that are incurred by the organization that's running the tour itself. So I don't think slum tours are an effective way of helping people who live in slums.
So throw this back to Stephanie. Do you think that there are more efficient ways to do this than through these tours?
Honestly, no. I mean, there are dozens of NGOs in Dharavi, but the fact that we have a steady source of income and a sustainable way to reach the community is powerful. We give 80% of our profits. This year, that was over 30% of our turnover. So it's a good way to be able to fund the activities. And I'd like to mention that when we started the tours was the same time we started the NGO, and the way we chose the activities was by asking the community, what do you need? Which at the time was English lessons and computer skills, because they weren't getting jobs they would otherwise. So each time we have an idea for a new project, it's born out of what they would like.
I'm curious about the sensitivity that people tread around the idea of going to see people who are not as wealthy as the people who are going to see them. So I jumped onto a website for movie tours of the rich and famous. And I'm just going to play this to you. See what you think.
World-renowned guides taking you to over 40 magnificent homes of the rich and famous. Warning, you will be in the celebrities' natural habitats. Keep your cameras ready. You never know who or what you might see. On this 2-hour tour, you may very well see more glitz and glamour than some will ever see in a lifetime.
So that's pretty much the same thing, but you're just staring at rich people.
Do you know that a lot of those people who live there don't like it? You come to their neighborhood, you tour around, that's where they live, that's where they walk.
What are your sources for knowing that they don't like it?
I know a few celebrities.
Okay. Fabian, as I was playing that, you started to smile. What was that smile for when I was showing the homes of the rich and famous that people love to go and gawk at?
I think the key, one of the fun things about it is, of course, that we don't necessarily, or I certainly don't feel the same sense of ethical concern about this practice, because you think, well, these guys are feathered and they're well enough; they can deal with a bit of, that kind of attention. I think we can learn something from that, actually, because we assume that the kind of attention that slum tourists give to slums is necessarily in some way sensed as something that, like, oh, I don't want you to see this. But again, I'm saying there is a lot of evidence that actually quite a few people in slums are also quite happy to be seen, to be showing this is our lives. And of course, there's boundaries to that. And of course, in every destination, you have these reports of like very absurd and deplorable practices. But there is also a tendency, certainly from some of the research we've done, that people don't really mind and they're quite happy to be seen and to be visited. And it's important to keep that in mind. There's not this feeling of like shame and like, no, because they might think that they've really achieved something already, moving where they've moved and coming up and want to show and so forth.
Okay, Lola.
The thing is, that's actually one of the issues, which is, for example, when I spent a lot of time in Soweto, what annoyed people was that they weren't doing anything that interesting. They're like, you're coming to watch me eat. You're coming to watch me go to a restaurant. What's the big deal about that? The only difference is I look different from you and I live in a different area. So why are you here? That's what was that's what people found offensive. It wasn't that they were doing, showering in a shack. They were irritated by the fact that people who actually did the same things as them, just happened to maybe be in a hotel or something, in a different time, were coming to look at them do ordinary things. That's what they found annoying.
So when the bus tours of, today we're going to Edinburgh, tomorrow we're going to Paris, and those bus tours that go around Europe.
Yeah.
And everybody jumps off and looks at people and then jumps back on again.
They go to see sites. They go to see buildings.
Right.
I mean, Lee's tour seems different because they're showing you buildings, they're showing you monuments, they're showing you historical, documents and that sort of thing, not human beings eating and walking around, playing football and doing the same thing that your own kids do, apart from they just have less money.
On the idea that the people that they go see look differently and are just different people in different settings, we have a tweet here from Andy who says, the whole idea seems like slum tourism creates an us and a them situation,
Exactly.
and nothing I'm hearing here convinces me that it's good. Lee, on the first part of that, when you did your tour, did you feel like it was an us and them? Did you feel like you were looking at an other, or what was your experience like?
No, are you talking about the one that I attended or the ones that my organization?
No, the ones that you attended, just as your experience going on the
attended,
tours.
That was the only one I've done. That one felt a bit more wholesome because I was walking around with residents of the slum that had grown up there, and I didn't really feel like an us versus them. I didn't feel like and this is for your entertainment. I felt very much more like here's some friends of mine. We're going to go and sit and have dinner with them. It actually felt more like a conversation, or just honestly almost like when you meet someone at a hotel or a hostel when you're traveling.
Fabian, I asked you this in the main show, and you made a very valid point about the context of poverty tourism. But if viewers are watching this and they're really interested and curious but don't want to do the wrong thing, where would you recommend that they went to?
I'm not sure I would recommend. I mean, it's a good start to do the tours. I'd like to, just generally to get exposed. And what you'll see is that people will do a tour and then they may be unhappy because they say, oh, that was maybe not so good. And then there's a chance to do, like one of the tweeters said, do something that gets inspired. I agree that the tourists bank very principally on the idea that there's some sort of other, that there's an us and them. However, that us and them already exists before the tour. And if the tour isn't done, then it continues to exist. If the tour is done, it might continue to exist, but it might not. And that's the chance that is there, I see. I can't really recommend a particular tour. I personally would hope that people are trying to explore the political reasons of poverty, the kind of socioeconomical context in which certain areas become distinct in slums, and how that pans out in a given situation. I know the way that the tours operate in the sense that people put them into their schedules is often 3 hours, which is way too short, of course, to get any idea of the complexities as they exist. Mm-hmm. But I maintain it's better than nothing.
Okay. All right. So Fabian, Stephanie, Lee, Lola, this conversation has been going on for 40 minutes and it's not over yet, but it is over right now on stream.aljazeera.com. I'm just curious, where do you go on vacation?
Anywhere that's interesting. I was in Marrakesh recently.
Okay. Do you do tours?
I don't do tours.
I think that's the key.
I meet local people. I go to restaurants, I go where locals go, and I talk to people and I hang out with them. That's what I do.
Omar,
it's not that hard.
Are the community one way or the other on this one?
There's actually still unconvinced, and it's plenty of back and forth. But
I think they're with you, Lola.
There is one interesting closing tweet, though, if you want to take a look at it. On the question of what we can do to actually try to make these tours into a positive experience, Shireen says, sure, let's rip up the whole idea and make it a community partnership for cultural exchange on both sides and cut out the word poverty. which I think would be a very interesting idea.
I love
like
our
that.
community. They always have great things to say right at the end of the show. Wraps it up beautifully. Tomorrow, would you give up millions of dollars and a career in professional sports for the sake of your religion? American professional football players, the Abdullah brothers, did just that. Find out their incredible story on the stream in the next edition. But right now, you know where we will be. We will be online arguing with Lola over here. Stream.aljazeera.com. See you there. Take care.